Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to what is essentially the last video that we're going to have in the humanities class. And it's also the last video for our 20th century unit. Now, it's also going to be a very, very quick video because essentially what we're doing here is going to be sending you on a research or a series of research assignments for this part of the course. So in reality, when I'm teaching this in class, in person, we go through the whole, 7 or so units on the humanities, and we do more work in class in the beginning, usually because I have ninth graders or just kind of earlier students who are earlier in their education process. And then as we get further and further, either to the end of ninth grade or even to the end of whatever year we're teaching this in, at that point, students are a little bit more adept at researching and doing assignments on their own, all that kind of stuff. So I give them a larger volume of research assignments as we get closer and closer to the end. And that's essentially where we peak at this point. So we've gone through, as you can see here, all of the major ideologies that are present during the 20th century. We go through the major conflicts of the 20th century, the human rights violations especially. We research the culture wars and the different sort of ideas that are coming up and circulating around the culture wars. And then what we shift to now to conclude the course is art in the 20th century. Okay. Now, the art forms that we've covered in this course generally have revolved around literature, right? It's been literature in all of its different forms, whether it's epic poems, whether it's novels specifically, whether it's what do you want to call it, myths and all the legends that we go through. It's all these sort of typical classical sort of pieces of artwork. Well, now moving into the 20th century, we have not only all of those still there, we have novels, especially. We have a lot of novels becoming like the major dominant form of literary art expression. But then we actually have an explosion of different genres in music as well, and also the emergence of a completely new medium of art, which is film, which really, really explodes and becomes one of the most dominant forms of art expression in the world today. So, what we're going to do here is we're going to essentially ask you to go through all three of those mediums and do essentially something that we've done before. So, for example, with literature, let's start there. For literature, we need to select 1, 2, 3, just like we did last time with the Enlightenment novels. We need to create a list of at least 3 20th century novels that you're going to research and present on with those 4 questions or those 4 categories you need to research them with. Now, what particular criteria have I laid on you about that? Out of the 3 have I laid on you for those? We need to select novels that we have not read in English class. Okay, I don't want you researching, so for example, The Great Gatsby or Of Mice and Men or stuff like that. Okay, stuff like that that's usually in the canon of English literature that we have you read in high school. Leave that aside. I want us to do something different, right? I want us to get a little bit outside of that, maybe to something even more famous that we haven't read before. Okay, now here's some general guidelines for this as well. I want you to stay within these sort of parameters of genre. First and foremost, we have kind of an emergence of what I have really crudely called like critical genres. So dramas or just general stories that are acting as a form of criticism for something during this period in time. Now, the 2 that I just mentioned, The Great Gatsby and Of Mice and Men, essentially are critical genres, I would say. They fill the role of tragedies, romances, drama, but they are in their essence critiquing something. They're pointing out something that is wrong with society as the authors saw it, particularly the American dream. So if you can find another novel from the past, 100 or so years, the 20th century novels, that critiques an element of our society or the society of that time, the culture of that time, let's grab that. Okay. And if it's relatively well known, if it's famous, let's grab that. Aside from this, we have the emergence of the dystopian genre. Okay. Now that one is very, very rich. in options to choose from. And a lot of the times we're very familiar with this in class because if you're, for example, if you took my AP literature class, we definitely went over that in the form of 2001. I'm not 2001 Space Odyssey. In some ways what I think of. Fahrenheit 451. So Fahrenheit 451 is a dystopian novel. You also could choose something like George Orwell's 1984. You could use Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and many, many more. Okay. You could, I want it to be a novel though, so you can't choose like Harrison Bergeron, which was something again we read in 10th grade. I want you to choose an actual novel of the dystopian genre. Why is the dystopian genre so popular, so emergent in this particular period? I actually talk about that more in the Lord of the Flies unit in 10th grade. So go check that out if you want some more insight into the dystopian genre that has emerged during this period. But you know, doesn't really require that much deep insight to understand why authors and writers are interested in exploring how a society could go horribly wrong during this particular century. Okay. Now, the other one that emerges is science fiction, right? So this whole idea of exploring the different themes and issues and conflicts that come with an emergent and exponentially growing scientific power and capacity, a technological capacity of human beings. So try to find some of the most popular and famous science fiction novels of the past century, and let's report on one of those. And the last two that we have are fantasy and existentialism. So fantasy has emerged, it obviously was around during basically the late 1800s. You definitely had fantasy as a genre there, but it doesn't explode to the degree that it does until the 20th century. Of course, what I'm referring to therein is the two novels, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, it's no secret to my students, especially anyone who can see my room, that I'm a huge fan of fantasy, in particular Tolkien's work. The reason for this, though, the reason that I do include him in a humanities study, or at least I mention him in the humanities study, is because if you look at the top 5 best-selling novels of all time, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are up there on the top 5. So to have one man have 2 of the best-selling novels of all time, that is in the past, 2 or 3, 250, 300 years, that guy has sold more novels than any of the other top 5, at least with his 2 that are on that list. So that's pretty insane. So there's something going on there. There's something that's really speaking to us as a group of people, as a society, as a culture, that Tolkien or just any fantasy author in the past century has really, really touched on. So check out Tolkien. If you don't like him, you could check out C.S. Lewis. If you're not a fan of him, you could check out, oh gosh, what's his name? Philip Pullman. George R. R. Martin's starting to write in the late 1900s, so is J.K. Rowling. But I would prefer somebody kind of like before the 90s. So like look for fantasy before the 90s if you can. And then finally, we have the existentialism movement, right? Still kind of reverberating from what we saw with Nietzsche and the philosophies of the Enlightenment. We have figures like Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, and Soren Kierkegaard, all literary figures and philosophical figures writing both plays and novels. So if you can find a play or a novel, I will accept those as well for the existentialist genre. So for example, if you want to look at the play by Jean-Paul Sartre, No Exit, fantastic, fantastic piece of existential literature, very, very profound in what it's saying, or Waiting for Godot or something like this. Go and check those out and report back on those. Now, what is it that we are reporting on, just to remind you? If you look back at the notes, it's the exact same structure that we did for the book research and reports on the Enlightenment. So I want you to tell me, what's the title? What is the general summary? Again, usually about like 3 or 4 bullet points. Give me a general summary of what happens in the story. Spoilers included, please. Do all that you need to do there. What is the style and the genre here, right? So the genre should be pretty basic, pretty much, a straightforward answer. But I want you to dig a little bit deeper into that. Tell me what other elements are within that genre, and we're going to do this for films in a moment too. So I don't want you to just say, oh, like the Lord of the Rings is a fantasy genre. It's like, well, yes, it's very clearly fantasy, but what type of fantasy? Is it adventure? Is it tragedy? Is it a war story? Is it just an adventure story? Like, is it just a journey story? What is it exactly? Like, what other genres could fit within that? Because of course, genres do overlap. They do kind of mesh together. So what are the predominant genres within the text that you're choosing? And then the same thing goes for themes. Tell me the themes that you see present here. And again, just like with the novels and the Enlightenment, I want you to choose maybe the top three most critical, most important themes of that work, and then find me the most in your assessments or in the assessment of whatever tools you're using to research these novels. What is the most important passage and the most famous passage of those particular works that you're selecting? Okay, so you're only doing three of those. So you can't do one from each genre. You got to do one from at least three of the genres. Okay, so something different from any three of those categories. Okay, now, just like during the Enlightenment, we are going to explore music. So after you've done your research on the various different types of novels, we're going to shift, take a break from reading and stuff. We're going to go to music. Because, guys and gals, with the kind of in the wake of the Romantic movement and the emergence of, more and more music and more globalization and cultural expressiveness, we have an explosion of different genres of music, whether it be the blues, whether it be jazz, rock and roll, pop, all different varieties of rock and roll. The expressive sort of tradition that we saw during the Romantic era carries through and really kind of like catches a new flame, and it ignites once again in the culture in the form of all the different types of music of this era. So for this segment, what I'm going to do is, once again, same thing that we did during the Enlightenment. I'm going to ask you to select not three different artists now, no, not like three pieces from three different artists. I'm going to ask you to select four different pieces of music from those four genres that we just mentioned before, and then articulate, once again, after you go through the process of finding a calm, a good place to focus mentally and even like, physically able to focus on these pieces of music, sit down and really listen to them and explain to me the emotions, the mood, the effect that these pieces have on you. I want one from each of these genres. So blues, jazz, rock and roll, disco, or pop. Okay, so there's actually five. You have to choose four. So choose four out of those five, and then research on your own. Research again from the 20th century. Most famous blues songs, most famous jazz songs, most famous rock and roll, so on and so forth. You pick which one you want. I don't really mind which one you pick because there's a lot. There's a lot you can do. So pick one of those and then report back on how it makes you feel, what sort of things you notice about it, what general mood it has. Just describe the music to me. And then, of course, tell me which artist and piece is your favorite and why. Okay, now, a lot of people wait for this, of course, when we shift and we really conclude the course actually with this, with the emergence of the completely new form of art in the form of film. Okay. Film, moving pictures, as we call them, I want you, for this particular assignment, to not look up summaries. I want us to take the time to actually get the movie by whatever means you see appropriate, you're able to do. Find a place to sit and watch it. And just like with music, actually devote your attention physically, emotionally, mentally to absorbing the film and listening to it, watching it, letting it affect you, and absorb it as long as it might be. Something like Gone with the Wind, it's like 4 hours long. So take your breaks if you want. And then I need you to answer at least, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions about your selected film. Which films, by the way, can we select? If you go back to the page here, we have our selection. You can choose, number one, Casablanca, right? What some people regard as one of the best movies made, period, one of the best films ever made. The only contender for that is the film Citizen Kane. Okay, so two of the best films ever made right there, Citizen Kane, Casablanca. So sit down, engage with those, and then report back on those questions for us. You could choose Gone with the Wind. It's a little bit more, kind of not popular level, but it's very enduring. People seem to like it quite a bit. So that's another one. It's a Wonderful Life. Definitely one of the most famous holiday movies ever. Really, really good Christmas movie if you want to watch that. The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, famous, probably the most famous Western movie of all time. It's a particularly famous genre of this era. And then The Godfather is another one as well. So The Godfather is a famous adaptation of the Mario Puzo tragic novels about the mafia. So if you're interested in the crime kind of aspect of storytelling, choose that one. And in real time, I'm going to add one more just because I have to and because it's me. I'm going to say if you want, you can watch Star Wars and add that in as well. Okay, because Star Wars is definitely deserves its place among a very influential and groundbreaking film for whatever reason, for a number of reasons in this century. Okay, so you're going to pick one of these. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you got 7 films to choose from. The only genre I did not include in here was something like horror or the monster films. And the reason for that is because if all goes well, I'm going to also put out a class on evil in literature and evil in art in general, and we're going to talk about some of the famous monster films in there. So I'll save that for them. But for just your general humanities knowledge, choosing from those 7 will do you very much good. Now, what do you need to report on? 5 questions. Number 1, what genres, plural, do you see present in this film? Explain each, right? So what do we see going on here? How many different overlapping genres? Is there romance? Is there drama? Are there elements of horror? Is there war? Is there like all this kind of stuff? Number 2, who are the central characters in this film? Describe each of them. So shoot for like 4 central characters at most, and then talk to me about who they are, what they're like, what they kind of symbolize, what they represent. And then for number 3, central conflicts in the film. So where do we see the struggles? What struggles are really pushing the story forward? Describe each of those central conflicts. Again, I would maybe shoot for like 3 here. Try to find the 3 at very, very minimum 2, but shoot for 3 at most. 3 major conflicts of this story. Number 4, what do you suspect are the themes of the films? What is trying to be communicated? That's a tough one, okay? Because again, we can have multiple themes, right? It's not just simplistic. There are many things being communicated at many different levels of analysis for all of these films. So try to take a look at them and look at the conflicts, look at the issues facing the characters, facing the whole story as a whole, and then look at how those stories are resolved, what sort of resolution that they reach. What is the creator of this film, of this piece of artwork, trying to communicate to the audience about his or her themes, okay? Now, for number 5, how does this film connect with or draw inspiration from history or its contemporary issues, okay? So as we're watching these films, we're going to see that some of them do reference very clearly historical events and elements of the 20th century, right? Because as we said, it's a period of history with immense upheaval and immense conflict and tragedy in it. So you want to see, are any of those issues reflected in the issues of this particular film? And you want to look again at a more symbolic, more deep level. So for example, something like Star Wars. Star Wars very clearly is set in a galaxy far, far away, a long time ago. But are the issues that it is presenting and it is putting forward trying to respond to something that's happening in the 20th century? Is it trying to say something about what we saw in the 20th century? Probably, absolutely. So try to articulate that with whatever film you choose. And then if you see other elements of history, other elements of the humanities being pulled into or kind of giving some inspiration to those films, talk to me about those, whether it's the genre, like in a deep sense, whether it's symbolism, all this kind of stuff, whether it's like clear allusions, you choose. So do that, try to enjoy the film. And then once you've done that, once we've reported on it, you can sit back and enjoy the fact that you have completed essentially the humanities course. I'm going to put out a video for the final, right? The final exam, or kind of what I choose for the final exam. And it's very simple. Don't worry about it. It's really quite straightforward. And now that's it, essentially. We're done. And I will have my final words to you, the final points of the course, in the next video about the final essay is what it will be. All right. So go ahead and do that. Enjoy the music, enjoy the art, enjoy the movie, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much and have a fantastic day. Bye.